And I quote the famous Steve Jobs said, "It's an iPod, it's a phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. It's the first generation iPhone. 10 years later, that's coming up right now. Let's go." So, what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology, and welcome to the first generation iPhone 10 years later. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because this is its 10-year birthday here on the iPhone first generation, and that marks quite a long time. This is a decade old now, and we kind of take a look at a nostalgic look to see how the iPhone has aged over the years. Now, I will do a separate video comparing this to the latest iPhone 8 later this year to just see how far Apple has come, but for now let's just take a look at a vintage look right here. And if you want to see any other versus videos, let me know down below. So let's begin on the left side. You can see we do have the iconic mute switch here, mute switch toggle, which showed a orange dot, meaning that was in silent mode. If you go like this, sound mode was on, and you can see there are the volume rockers here, and they're very distinctive. You could definitely tell that this was the volume rockers, but just look how thick that phone is. I mean, it's about as thick as an iPhone 7 Plus, or maybe even thicker in a case. So iPhone 7 Plus, even in a case, is not as thick as the original iPhone. Look at that. Wow. We've come a long way when it comes to the design Apple has. Well, we would expect that over a 10-year time frame, but definitely for its time, it was definitely a sleek, modern device for its time. So it did have an aluminum build on the back here, which felt very solid. It's built like a tank. I mean, you could drop this thing all day long and you're not going to break it. It's not a delicate glass or anything like that. We did have aluminum frame coming around the edges of the original iPhone here. They're a little bit nicked up. My iPhone 1 is definitely nicked up. It's not new. There is some issues with it. Over here at the top is a 3.5mm headset jack. We no longer have that on the latest iPhones. They got rid of that. This is the SIM card tray right here, which used the original, the older SIMs, not the Nano, not the little small SIMs. And there is the power button. And this was a nice contrast with the black on the silver. It was very, very easy to feel these buttons out. Now, this is a 2-megapixel primary camera, so pretty laughable these days. You know, you're not going to go out shooting videos with a 2-megapixel camera unless you really want to shoot in such low resolution. But for its time, it took pretty solid pictures. The iPhone definitely improved a lot with the likes of the 3GS, as well as the iPhone 4 days really improved on the camera game. So they did step it up quite a bit when it comes to that, but there was no front-facing camera here on the iPhone 1. So I'm going to turn it on, and you can see that I do have a little bit of an issue here with my first-gen iPhone. The top shows a gray bar. I don't know how that happened, but it is there. Now, in terms of weight, the iPhone first generation weighed about 135 grams or 4.76 ounces. So this is definitely a chunky little phone here. It had some heft to it. It's not a super heavy phone. It was definitely portable. You could take it out easily, but it definitely is a lot heavier than some of the later, iPhones like the iPhone 5, the iPhone 5S, and maybe the iPhone 6S Plus and 6 Plus are, heavier, but because of their balance, they don't feel as heavy as this phone. So you can see it didn't take that long to boot up, but granted, it is running a very simple version of iPhone OS. Now, this wasn't even called iOS back in the day. It was just called iPhone OS 1, iPhone OS 2, and iPhone OS 3. So you can see no wallpaper on the original iPhone. They only had wallpapers on the lock screen. I am actually running the most up-to-date version that was released for this phone, which is it's iPhone OS 3 here on this iPhone right here. So just looking at the software itself, you could definitely tell that it does have a similar core experience to what we've had ever since, even up until today. Now, a lot of people were making a big deal out of this YouTube app. Back in the day, if you remember this, when Apple removed the YouTube app and decided to let Google put their own YouTube app on the iPhone, a lot of people made a big brouhaha about that, but I think it's been fine up until this day, and the Google version of the YouTube app is much better than what we had with the Apple one. But a lot of people like that Apple had their own built-in YouTube app, which was pretty iconic back in them days. Now, Apple did introduce their own maps here, and these weren't very good at all. Back in these days, everybody was like downloading Google Maps, or if they didn't have it on the iPhone, people were like, man, Android has the best map system ever. And this was a big, sore point for iPhone back in these days. Now, iPhone had always been very smooth for its time, so you know, in terms of the software itself, it's always been pretty slick and smooth. Here's a look at the old dialer here on the iPhone, and here's a look at the old iPod. So a lot of people were replacing their iPods with this, but for those of you who couldn't afford the steeper price of the iPhone 1 back in the day, I mean, this phone retailed for $599 on a 2-year contract. So not only a 2-year contract, but $599 up front. So you still had to pay your subsidies as well as $599 up front for this. So this is not a cheap phone for its time. Now you can get an iPhone on contract for about $199, $299, depending if you go for a Plus or if you go for a smaller edition. So you had to have the bucks to get this one. Now the camera here, you can see the software a little bit slow here, but definitely took pictures. I mean, pretty horrid pictures, to be honest with you. But I mean, it will take a photo. We're not going to take the best pictures here under this lighting, but you could see Lumix, little Lumix thing right here. Definitely for its time, it's okay. I mean, it's better than flip phones, honestly. I mean, flip phones, Motorola Razrs, VGA cameras, no thanks. 2 megapixels was something a little bit better. So looking at the context, you can see, but if you guys are noticing, if you're iPhone users, I mean, the core experience of iPhone hasn't changed as much as you might think. You know, of course, the icons are updated. It doesn't have this older looking feel, but definitely, you know, it looks very similar to today. I mean, they've updated a lot of services. Of course, there's a lot more. There's iCloud Photos now. iCloud is much more enhanced, but it's simpler back in these days. There was less features. But I would argue these features made the iPhone experience a little crippled, and I think the iPhone experience today is much better. Some people will argue, no, I like the older, simpler iPhone experience of back in the day, but I definitely think this is not very usable, you know, today by today's standards, but still nice to look at it. So on the iPhone 1, you could still browse the web even here in 2017. 10 years later, you still have the multi-touch, you know, browser here. This was the big thing, the multi-touch browser. It's the first phone with a multi-touch interface, and this was Steve Jobs' idea right here, and it worked very well here. You know, even back in this time, I mean, I could scroll through stuff here 10 years later. That shows quite a bit of longevity here for iPhone. Now, this was coated in oleophobic coating, so it had fingerprint resistance. It was Corning Gorilla Glass, and this was upgradable to iOS 3.1.3. So if I go over here into the settings, and I go into general, and I go into about, you can see this is running 3.1.37E18, so a very old version. Now you could get this iPhone back in these times in 4 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes, and the maximum capacity of 16 gigabytes. So such a large maximum capacity, ain't it? Nah, it's not really that big at all. Wi-Fi 802.11bg, not BGN, that's the newer standard, and AC these days. You know, it did have an accelerometer, a proximity sensor here on the original iPhone, no fingerprint scanner, had these little icon that kind of supposed to resemble the applications. And this thing had a talk time of about 8 hours and a music play time about 24 hours. So if you wanted to use this as an iPod, this had great battery for that. Standby time of 250 hours. And yeah, I mean, solid battery, not bad for a first release, but this was more of a beta release to me. The iPhone 3G just ushered in a lot more features, and the 3GS was a nice update over both of those phones right there. Now this had a 320 by 480 pixel display, and again, 480 display for back in them times was just fine. I mean, 720p ushered in HD on most phones. I mean, the Google Nexus had that, and as well as the iPhone 4, which would introduce the Retina display, and that was really a game changer as well. But we're talking about the original iPhone here, and this had a 3.5-inch display. It says TFT panel, and it had 16 million colors. So, I mean, this display for its time, again, really good here. Now, this phone, you can no longer find parts for it. It's been discontinued. There's no way you can get this fixed. You take this in the Apple store, they'll probably laugh at you. Nah, they won't laugh at you, but they'll be like, we don't support that no more. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a run through the apps now just to see how they perform here. So going into messages, that's open. Going into photos, that's open. Going into camera, and that is open. And I am really impressed with the performance here for 2017. I mean, some phones you open up back in the day just will not even open. Like, things will be so slow, you'll just be waiting all day. Like my original Android phone, Nah, man, that thing just doesn't even open apps. Going into weather here, you can see not bad there. Going into voice memos, you can still do some recordings here on your iPhone. Classic look here. I actually went into stocks already. Going into the classic notes here, and you could see classic notes right there. The skeuomorphic design here looks kind of dated now, you know, the old Scott Forstall days. And calculator and settings here and iTunes Store. Now, the original iPhone OS 1 didn't even have the App Store or the Maps or the iTunes. So this is 3.1.3. iPhone OS 1 didn't have all this stuff. So very simple, clean design. And that pretty much is a look at the iPhone first generation 10 years later. So how has it held up? I mean, you can get this phone now on eBay for about 20 bucks, 30 bucks. If you find a brand new one, they're going for about $5,000, $6,000 closed up, caged up. So this is quite a gem to find these days, but you could find them, you know, beat up, used on eBay. But if you want a brand new one, these are going for the thousands right now because it's such an iconic device. Anyway, that was the first generation iPhone 10 years later. My thoughts on it: the iPhone has come an extremely long way. It is now a part of our mainstream culture, you can say. Pretty much everyone knows what the iPhone is. I think that it's no longer the phone that it once was, like game changing. I mean, you could find Android phones for $30, $50. Now you can even find cheaper iPhones that are much better than this right here these days used. So pretty much everyone has an iPhone these days, but at the time this was game changing, and I think that this phone is responsible for pretty much all the phones that you see on the market today. You know, now we have things like the Galaxy S8 with its curved edge display. That's a new innovative design, but this was like the stepchild or the child to all of this. So what do you guys think of the first generation iPhone? Drop your thoughts, comments down below in the comment section of this video, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick here, helping you to master your technology. I will catch you all in the next one. Be sure to be well, and peace.